Russia is now seeking military and economic aid from China, but China somehow denies this. Now, let me give you the details and then we can decipher who's telling the truth here. China dismissed US allegations that Russia had asked it for military equipment and economic support. The White House has warned that direct military support or large-scale efforts to help Russia evade economic sanctions would have consequences. Now, they haven't detailed what those consequences are, but President Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, met with China's top diplomat in Rome today on Monday. Now, what type of military capability would Russia be looking for? Now, remember, the invasion into Ukraine is super asymmetrical. You have Russia, which has far greater military capability, invading Ukraine, which did not have nearly the military capability. But Ukraine has put up such resistance to this invasion that the Russian invasion has not been going as planned. And I think that you can tell by Vladimir Putin intensifying his attacks on civilians. You can see the frustration. Now, traditionally, China has actually bought military equipment from Russia rather than the other way around. Russia has increased its sales of weaponry to China in recent years, but there is something that China has that Russia wants: advanced missile and drone capabilities that Russia could use in its Ukraine campaign. Now, I should also note that a spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Washington said that he had never even heard about this request from China. Again, going on with this denial that Russia is seeking aid. The embassy spokesperson said this: the current situation in Ukraine is indeed disconcerting. The high priority now is to prevent the tense situation from escalating or even getting out of control. But let me be clear, China, if I want to be generous, has been complicit in this invasion. If I want to be less than generous, which I think they deserve, they've actually helped China in regard to the propaganda that they spew on behalf of Russia. So they're helping Russia in their invasion with the propaganda. So Jake Sullivan says, we are communicating directly, privately to Beijing that there will absolutely be consequences for large-scale sanctions, evasion efforts, or support to Russia to backfill them. We will not allow that to go forward and allow there to be a lifeline to Russia from these economic sanctions from any country anywhere in the world. Look, we don't know, like, that's a threat, of course. We don't know what that threat really entails. I'm a little cautious in believing that there will be some significant consequences for China. We're so tied to China economically. I just find it hard to believe that there really will be any consequences. And that goes to the point regarding China's support for Russia. In recent days, Chinese diplomats, state media, organizations, and government agencies have used a range of platforms and official social media accounts to actually amplify a conspiracy theory that says the Pentagon has been financing biological and chemical weapons labs in Ukraine. That is completely unfounded. There are biological research facilities in Ukraine, much like most other countries. I mean, we have biological research facilities in the United States to research biological, like pathogens, viruses, things like that.
There's one in China too. You might have heard of it. It's in Wuhan.
Yeah.
China, do you think that justifies an invasion of a country? Be careful what your answer is.
And by the way, Chinese officials have consistently voiced sympathy for Russia during the Ukraine war by reiterating Putin's criticism of NATO and also blaming the United States for starting this conflict. They have refrained from any mention of a Russian war or invasion, even as they expressed general concern for the humanitarian crisis. In one statement, China claimed that they believe that sovereignty is important, but they did not specify what they meant by sovereignty. Are they referring to the sovereignty of Russia or the sovereignty of Ukraine? And remember, Russia thinks that Ukraine belongs to it. Russia does not believe that Ukraine is a sovereign country.
And China believes Taiwan belongs to it and is not a sovereign country. So the fact that they said it is really important to maintain sovereignty and territorial integrity without naming either country is very telling. It's telling in that they're clearly not blaming the Russians, but also they're reserving the right to blame the Russians. They're also reserving the right to blame the Ukrainians. By having such a non-committal statement, they're showing, hey, we haven't made up our mind yet. And that is really, really important. In fact, I'll tell you a weird analogy, but America put out a very similar statement when there was a coup against Erdogan in Turkey. And that's when I thought, oh, maybe America did it, right? Because if there was a coup going on in the United Kingdom, we would not be non-committal. We would say, no, that's terrible, and it's atrocious and outrageous. So China is clearly not saying that in this case about the Russian invasion. On the other hand, they're not rushing super quick to Russia's aid either, right? So rhetorically, they've been relatively neutral to leaning to Russia. In some of the votes in the UN, they've been on Russia's side. I'm sure economically they're happy to trade with Russia and happy to bring them into their sphere. And another balancing act is happening right now. There's a shifting of the balance, because before China used to buy weapons from Russia, and now Russia is beginning to request to buy weapons from China. So it went from Russia kind of nurturing China along as a potential ally against America to now China being much larger and nurturing Russia as almost like an older brother, like hang in there. I know the Americans are gonna knock you out, but hang in there a little longer. And meanwhile though, hey man, my hands are clean, I haven't done anything yet.
Are they keeping their powder dry, is that what you're saying?
In a sense, they quite literally are keeping their powder dry, and the Chinese know a thing or two about gunpowder.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because if you take a step back and you look at the real objective, both by Russia and China, like the one thing that really brings them together is their disdain for the United States as a hegemonic power, as the top hegemon, right? And so they see this necessity to move toward what we used to have globally, which is a multipolar world, right? Where you don't have one hegemon, you don't just have the West dominating everything. And so I think that's part of what is motivating the Chinese to essentially avoid being overly critical. I mean, they haven't really been critical of Russia at all. I haven't seen any of that. In fact, they're helping Russia in spreading disinformation and propaganda.
Yeah, but China could help Russia a lot more, and it has not chosen to do that yet. And by the way, guys, let me get to the other part that's so important about that. If China thought Russia was winning and had swung the tide, they would be far more likely to help them at that point to be on the winning side. The fact that they have not yet rushed to Russia's defense, sorry, I keep using that funny term, more significantly in terms of arms, money, etc., shows you they think Russia might lose, and we don't want our fingerprints on this, because later the West will want war crime tribunals, and there will be severe consequences eventually. And then finally, from my point of view, look, the US military is always prepared for fighting on two military fronts, two major wars, right? Now, the new terrain, although we're also in the old terrain too, obviously with the actual physical war, but the more new terrain that's more powerful is the financial wars. And so we are not prepared to fight on two economic fronts at the same time. So like we're saying, hey, you have to have balance, help the Ukrainians as much as humanly possible without doing a no-fly zone and getting us pulled into a world war. We have to, have real consequence for the Chinese if they help the Russians in significant ways without overdoing it and then leading to global economic meltdown, because then everyone is at war financially and no one's cooperating anymore. And by the way, if we're all not cooperating anymore, that also makes more war more likely. The more we're interconnected, the less likely a world war becomes. So the Chinese still sitting around the edges is not such a bad thing. That means they don't have full confidence in Russia and how it's going.
Well, I mean, Russia clearly doesn't have full confidence in how it's going, and it's because of how much resistance they're dealing with. I mean, the fact that they're now reaching out to China for aid is amazing.
Yeah,
love to hear it.
And by the way, the Americans leaked this, and they did it with reservation, and they did not give some important details because they did not want to give away, apparently, a very high-level informant in one of those two countries, China or Russia. But they bothered to endanger that great informant to put the story out there anyway, because basically they're saying, no, everybody stick together, Russia's losing, and even China thinks they're losing.